Okay, so hope everyone had a good April Fool's Day and is enjoying spring. As as you've probably all noticed, things are getting even more flowery out in the world right now. You've got violets and the purple dead nettle in full bloom, pretty much, and apple trees and hawthorn trees are starting to bloom. Redbud trees they were in bud 2 weekends ago, and now they're more open in bloom. And you'll also notice that a lot of wind pollinated trees are starting to spread their pollen. You might see them at a distance and see that some of the trees just have a lot of like pale yellow uh, flowers on them. And if you are under them, or if your car is parked under them, anything that's under them might get covered with a light dusting of pollen. So there's lots and lots of that out there right now, as there always is this time of year. We haven't had so much rain in the last few days. So sometimes when those trees are blooming, just depending on whether it rains or not, you get either a lot of dust in the air from them, or else some of it will get washed away. But the air being full of pollen is good for the tree's reproduction, bad for people breathing it in a lot of the time. So it's kind of a balance going on there. But lots of that happening right now, and lots of flowering, and lots of regular ruderal herbs, backyard herbs, herbs of disturbed ground, waste places, waysides, things like that are starting to be abundant right now. Things like chickweed and cleavers, dandelion, of course. Lamb's quarters are very small, but they're up right now. Nettles are growing in places that have nettles. So it's a wonderful time of year to be out, to be gathering plants, learning to identify plants. There's no learning experience quite like the abundance of spring for someone who is getting used to connecting with the plant medicine world, and with both the botany side of things as well as the medicine side of things. There's just so much going on right now for you to observe in the environment. If, as most of us do, you live in the temperate zones of the northern hemisphere. There are some places where it's still snowy right now, and all of the things that I'm saying will come about a little bit later on. But here where I am, it's very springtimey, and it's we didn't have a very cold winter this year in this area, so we're having actually most things are more in bloom than usual, more flowery than usual. So it's a particularly abundant spring as far as flowers go, and the medicinal herbs to which they are attached. So probably if you go out to a field or a park or an untreated, unmowed yard right now, you can probably find between 20 and 50 different species of plants growing just in an average sized yard or a small field or something like that. There are just so many things that are in evidence right now. And I think that one of the great things about becoming an herbalist and learning about plant medicine is that you start seeing plants everywhere and recognizing specific plants, instead of just seeing everything as being sort of a green blur, or just some kind of plant. Without people don't necessarily know what they are, people don't necessarily even wonder what they are, they're just there. And once you start learning about them, you start recognizing them everywhere. You start seeing them on TV and in movies in the background and things like that. I remember watching a movie once several years ago about it involved a deserter from the Civil War the American Civil War, trying to make his way home. And he's traveling through the mountains, but the mountains that he was traveling through were obviously not North America. And I was like, oh boy, you took a wrong turn somewhere, because I could just see from the plants that were around him that he was, not actually in the mountains of North Carolina or wherever he was really supposed to be. So when you get used to looking at plants, you start seeing them as individuals rather than as just scenery. You start seeing them as specific kinds of plants rather than just something or other. And you start getting curious about the ones that you don't know, because you know that it's possible to recognize them. So, whereas before you might have not even wondered what a plant was, maybe you'll see a plant and think, what is that? I don't recognize it. And I think that is a wonderful part of the process, just getting to know the plants and just becoming kind of aware of them, even though you've always known that there were plants. Becoming aware of the varieties of them and the differences between them and so forth is a different kind of awareness of your environment that some of us might not have previously had before learning about plants. And so I always think that that's a great thing to cultivate. So for today's main topic, I want to talk about ethics and kind of the traditions and roles of herbalists and people who knew about herbal medicine in their larger societies, and what that sort of, what that means to you, what you need to understand about it, and also to some extent what I understand about it and how I see things, which might differ in some ways from other people. So I'm going to talk about all of that. A lot of the time when people talk about professional ethics, it's a really dry subject, and this may come across that way. I hope it's not so boring, but it's not necessarily the most or the part that people think about learning about, but it's important to know about. It's important to be aware of and kind of be conscious of, if you want to be good at doing this, if you want to be a good herbalist. So there are some things about ethics that are fairly universal, that are fairly, well understood and agreed upon by everybody, with regards to helping people heal, helping people with their health. And some of these have been written about since ancient times. Hippocrates, of course, famously wrote about medical ethics to some extent. And one of the things, he was from a specific tradition of healers, the Asclepiads. And they had their own specific rules that were not necessarily the same as everybody else's rules, but his writings, or the writings attributed to him and his school, kind of got more famous later on, many centuries later. But two of the things that he said that are just generally regarded as professional ethics pretty much everywhere you go for any sort of people who are doing any sort of healing. One of them is that anything that you learn through the course of what you're doing, you keep to yourself. You don't share information, because, if you are helping people with their health, you'll hear all kinds of things that are not necessarily publicly available information about that person. And this might be, things about their history, things about maybe about their love life, maybe about their financial situation, maybe about their family situation, all sorts of things like that, that would be private, maybe closely held information. And, you hear about that sort of thing when you're asking people about their health. And it's important, even if you don't think that it's something secret or something very private, that whatever you find out about them, you don't share that around. You don't tell anybody um, that you don't have their express permission to tell, and you don't press them for their permission to tell anybody either. Sometimes people will do something where they will say, "Oh, I helped you. Can you write me a testimonial for my website?" And people are going to feel beholden to you if you've helped them. And then you're taking someone who is in that position of feeling beholden to you and asking them to expose information about their health situation. And to me, that's not really, that's not very ethical. It might be, especially if you're one-on-one specifically asking a person for that kind of thing. I don't really consider that to be a very ethical thing to do, because they could say no, but they might feel disinclined to, or they might worry that if they displease you, they'll lose access to your help or something like that. So you don't want to put people in awkward situations like that. So yeah, not sharing their information is really important, except in ways that you've agreed upon with them ahead of time that are for their benefit. And that's the most important thing, is that it should be for their benefit, not yours, if you're going to do any sharing of their information. And that's a fairly universal thing. I mean, now in modern times, there's a lot of data mining, and there's a lot of third parties involved in conventional healthcare, like insurance companies and things like that, where sometimes it doesn't really go like that. Sometimes people's information might get shared in a way that's not something that they've explicitly agreed to, although there are some laws that kind of limit that sort of thing. And you'll hear a lot about these kind of laws, like HIPAA, which is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. And really, herbalists are not licensed in any of the states in the United States, as far as I understand it. And, there might be some case law that goes against this at some point or whatever, but herbalists aren't really beholden to that law. We're not really a covered entity under HIPAA by any standard that I can understand, by any, precedent that I can see. But I think that the ethics that are kind of that I'm talking about precede that. They were not created by these laws. They've been around, for thousands of years, possibly before anybody wrote about them. But the idea that whatever you learn, you keep to yourself, and that you're learning it only for the benefit of that person, not to use to your own advantage in any way, form, or fashion. And that's a really important thing for people to keep in mind. And the other thing is that another important thing that goes along with that is that you don't abuse your position with people. You don't, if you have somebody that you've helped, you don't use that closeness to ask for favors or to try to seduce them or anything like that. You have some agreement that you have going into it, maybe that they're going to pay you a certain amount of money for your services or whatever, but you don't try to use your position with them to take advantage of them in any way. And that's a really important and fairly universal tenet of ethics in healthcare and in the herbal world, as well as in conventional healthcare. It's really important that when you're working one-on-one with somebody, that you take that as a sacred trust, and that you use that accordingly. And if you do, if you act with integrity, there's a good chance that will work out in your favor, because if you don't, people don't like that, and it makes you seem sleazy or whatever. And with herbal medicine, everything you do is kind of based on reputation. You know, your honor, your integrity, how much people trust you is all vitally important for you to be able to keep on working with people, and for people to trust you enough to let you try to help them. And you know, that's not just if you're a professional, that's not just if you're doing it for money. That's you know, regardless of what the situation is, even if it's a matter of just helping friends and family, I think that everything I said still applies to that. That it's still very important that that the fact that they came to you for that help is something that you treat like a sacred trust, and don't try to use it as anything else. Which, you know, I mean, lots of people have done, unfortunately. And there's, uh, you know, of course, sometimes people in the herbal world tend more towards like making and selling products, you know, and I talk a lot about it from the perspective of working directly with people and trying to help those people. And there are a lot of people who do that. And there are also a lot of people who, like, you know, will say make a salve or some other product and some tinctures or whatever and try to sell those. And, you know, that is a little bit of a different business, but I think that you still really have to adhere to at least the same sense of responsibility, and the same sense of it being a situation where people are trusting you with their health and their lives. Because even if they're just buying stuff from you and not, you know, directly talking to you, not telling you anything, you know, that definitely changes your relationship with them. But they're still, you know, using that product for whatever the issue is, when they could be doing any of a variety of other things instead. And so they're you know, they're using your stuff, they're taking your medicine, they're um, trying your treatment or whatever. And the fact that they're giving that a try means that they're, you know, putting some part of their finite resources towards being able to try that, which could otherwise have gone towards something else. So it's important that you make it worthwhile. That you know, that, I mean, obviously you wouldn't want to try and cheat anyone or give anyone something that wasn't what it was supposed to be, or anything like that. That would be, you know, very scammy and very not okay by any standards. But it's also very important that you speak about it with integrity. That if you are offering something to people for their health, that you don't make claims about it that aren't right. You don't make claims about it that aren't careful, because if you are making claims about it without really having looked into it, you want to make sure anything you're saying is true and not just something that you're passing on because you heard it from somewhere. You know, so for instance, you could go out and find some incorrect information somewhere, that says maybe that that wild yam contains progesterone. That's an incorrect piece of information that I've seen in multiple places. So if you were making something out of it and telling people, you know, this is herbal progesterone, it's, and you know, when it's really not, then you're essentially still defrauding these people, even if what you said, even if you didn't know it wasn't true, because you should have known. You should have found out. You should have, you know, vetted the claim before you made it, instead of just passing along what is essentially gossip. So that's an important thing. And I'm sorry if I sound a little preachy. None of this is like in response to anything specific. It's just that over the course of, you know, decades, I've seen a lot of unethical behavior, and I want to make sure that I'm, you know, very clear about what I consider to be integrity and what I consider to be ethical behavior, as far as, you know, using plant medicine and offering plant medicine to people and to the community. So yeah, in my own career, in my own walk with herbal medicine and with plants, I'm not really doing a lot of trying to market specific remedies. I'm not, usually people will come to me and see me and get remedies for whatever is going on with them that are specifically made for them. And then sometimes those people will, call me and say, can I get some more of this and whatever? And maybe I'm making it for them without having another consultation or anything, but it's something that was at least initially specifically made for them. But I do have certain products that I make kind of consistently, that that I want to be sure that I'm not making any spurious claims about. For instance, during for a long time, I've made a combination of usnea, lemon balm, and elderberry to help people with viral illnesses, both to make it so that if they get it, it won't get them as bad, and make it so that if they have it, they'll get over it a little bit quicker. And before I made any statements about that combination, I tried to be able to say that I made sure that that the history of these plants had this history of use, that these plants had some, in this case, some clinical data for them individually that was relevant to the situation, and that I could tell people about that. That if somebody asks, what does this do? I can tell them what it does. And if they say, how do you know? I can tell them about how I know. And I never said anything to people to the effect of, this will keep you from getting a disease, or this will, prevent it or cure it or anything like that. I said, this is meant to increase the odds that if you do get sick, that you'll get over it faster and that it won't be as bad. And, of course, it can't guarantee that, but it's like to increase your chances. And so I make modest claims for things rather than dramatic claims. And that's very different from the culture that we're surrounded with. The culture that we're surrounded with, the commodified culture of things for sale, is very much geared towards, promoting everything as the greatest miracle ever, as something like, you won't believe what happens if you do this or whatever. And sometimes it's not like that. I say a lot of things like, this usually works, or this seems to help, and that sort of thing, because I'm making modest claims because I'm more sure that they're correct than if I were making a dramatic claim. Even though sometimes I do see dramatic results, but not everyone gets them, and I think there's a tendency for people to maybe try and write up the really dramatic and amazing cases and present those as though those were the usual outcomes. And that's not right either. That's not right at all. So I think it's really important to just only say things that you're sure about, and to talk about, this is how it seems rather than this is how it is a lot of the time, because there's always new information coming out. So I feel like that kind of really honest communication about what you're offering to people is really important. And it's really, a part of having integrity. And I think that integrity is a part of what allows you access into people's lives, because if you seem dishonest, you might actually build up a wonderful following and get a lot of people to think you're amazing and so forth. Lots of dishonest people do. I'm not trying to say that that dishonesty never prospers, because unfortunately sometimes it does. But I'm saying that I don't think that's a good way to go about it, and I think that it's just as likely not to work out. I don't think that you're necessary if you think that if someone were to think that being unjust were more likely to get them ahead, I don't think that that's necessarily true either. I think that you kind of have to do what's right and realize that there's a possibility, whether you were doing what's right or what's not right, there's the possibility that you might not get the outcome that you want. And that's something that we all have to be a little detached from. It's not like you can guarantee if you plant a seed that it's going to grow into a fully mature plant. There's a lot of things that could go wrong. But you do what you can and you hope for the best. And I think it's that way with ethical practice too. Try and grow what you're doing with integrity and with honesty and with information and truth. And you hope for the best. And, in my own experience, I have nothing to complain about. I think things have gone pretty well. I can't guarantee that would always be the case. And some things just come down to luck and lots of other factors as well. But I think that, that it's really important to be careful with your word and careful with what you say, not only to not intentionally deceive people, but to avoid the possibility of passing along incorrect information insofar as you're able to. And I'll be right back. In keeping with that, I hope I'm not boring everybody to death. I feel like this is important stuff to talk about at some point, and so I'm talking about it. But I know that it's not really necessarily that exciting, maybe. But in keeping with that, and this is a position where my tradition differs significantly from conventional medicine and what some other practitioners would be doing. I believe that it is important not to ever profess any sort of certain knowledge. There's this kind of thing that sometimes happens with people where they'll be told something like, you have 6 months to live, or you have 3 months to live if you do this and 6 months to live if you do that, or something like that. And I think that it's important not to act like we know what the future is going to hold. And, it would be much more honest to say, most people who have this condition have this kind of outcome, rather than here's what's going to happen to you specifically for sure. I consider that to be just as unethical as trying to tell somebody that a product will do something when you don't know that it really will, for instance. I think that it's just as unethical, and that it's basically rooted in superstition. We have this concept that sometimes people talk about prognosis, and prognosis is actually it's an ancient Greek word that means foreknowledge. It's the same thing as prophesia, which is like prophecy. It's the ability to see the future. And we use this word in the medical world to mean the likely outcome of a particular condition. And even though there's this understanding now that likely outcome doesn't mean that you can see the future. People still talk about it as though it's a psychic power. People still approach it as though it was some sort of a prophecy, or as though it was, a much more certain thing than it really is. So, I've definitely known people who outlived their prognosis, or who were told that they had a certain amount of time to live and ended up living a much longer, or in fact a much shorter in some cases, time. And it's important not to confuse an understanding of what usually happens in a situation with any sort of certain knowledge about what's going to happen this time. And so I think that that's I don't ever speak about someone's situation in those kinds of terms. I definitely am not hesitant to tell people about what the usual course of a condition is, but I'm also, going to leave it open that there's many ways that any given situation can turn out. So I think that that's an ethical issue too. So that's something that I feel the need to impart as an herbalist. That I think there's a lot of things in the culture of conventional medicine in the English speaking world that have sort of, in some cases, bled over into the world of herbalism, because most of the people who are alive now didn't grow up with herbal medicine. They grew up with just conventional medicine, and then maybe rediscovered herbal medicine later on. And so there's, maybe less of an understanding about how to talk about it, or more of a tendency to towards this cultural aspect of Western style conventional medicine, and how things are talked about and how things are thought about, that is, in some cases very strongly rooted in the superstitions and chauvinisms and prejudices of the 1700s, when this sort of thing was starting to become more standardized. So even though we've learned a lot about the life sciences and things like that since then, there are still things like the concept of prognosis, or like the concept of a specific medicine being for a specific condition, that are very deeply ingrained in the way a lot of people think about healing, that are fairly superstitious, really, and not necessarily based in an observable reality. The other thing that I think is something that is part of the tradition that I come from, that is not necessarily as much a part of everybody else's tradition, or for some people it is and for some people it isn't, is the concept of universal accessibility, or essentially like not turning people away because they don't have funds, which, at the point that you're at, you're probably not going to be treating people specifically for money, right? But if it comes to a point where you are, I think that it is that it's pretty essential ethically that you not turn somebody away because they can't pay you. And it's okay for things to cost a certain amount, and for things to to say this is what this costs, but also I think that it's not quite right to withhold it from somebody if they can't pay for it. And I know that that is kind of at odds with the larger culture as a whole, and that's kind of maybe hard to even imagine for a lot of people. And it was for me at a certain point in my life as well. But I knew that my ancestors had done the same thing in much rougher times than what the times I were going through were, times of war and famine and things like that. And they were still treating people without getting paid for it. And somehow it worked, somehow it keeps working. And so, I tell people that if somebody needs to come and see me, I have, my standard charge for what an office visit costs or what a 4-ounce bottle of tincture costs or something like that. But I also tell people that, if you can't pay it, let me know what you can pay and I'll give you that. Or if you can't pay anything, we can do that too. And so I think that that's, as far as when it comes to people's health and treating them, I would feel, if I ever knew that I withheld uh, a remedy that could have made someone's heart beat correctly over a matter of $25 or $50, that would feel to me just as unethical as putting someone's life at risk so that I could take that from them. I wouldn't put somebody's life in danger so that I could rob them for $50. So I'm not going to put somebody's life in danger so that I can transact an agreed upon business deal for $50 either. That may seem strange, but that to me, it just kind of, the other thing seems stranger. Doing otherwise seems stranger. So that's part of my ethics. That's definitely not a universal. Some people out there would say that I'm doing wrong by saying it that way, but that's part of how I see things, and do with that what you will. But I think that it's, really important to make healing accessible to the people around you, and that for me, that's my main goal as an herbalist, is to help people to feel better, to give people ease, to help heal them, and to, by extension, make the community healthier and a better place to live by being in it. And, do I hope to make a living doing so? Absolutely. Do I worry about not having enough money? Absolutely. But at the same time, I don't think that it would be beneficial to me in the long run to turn people away for just because their circumstances are such that they don't have money. Because a lot of the time, when people are sick and when they have money, don't coincide. Sometimes if somebody's got a chronic issue or a long-standing issue, that can definitely affect their ability to have money. And of course, some people just don't have money and they're more likely to get sick in general than people who have more resources. Lower paying jobs tend to be less healthy jobs in some ways. And so, there are a whole constellation of factors that I didn't have anything to do with the creation of, but that I would like to do what little I can to try and improve upon things for those people. And so that's kind of the reason why I take that approach. So there's that's a piece of my ethics that doesn't necessarily coincide with how everybody else does things. And that, like I said, that is a traditional piece of ethics in my family and in the history of our doings with herbal medicine over the centuries, that we've tried to have that tenet consistently. Another thing that I think is, at this point in time, a fairly universal piece of health ethics is it used to be that people would have secret formulas, that people would have their remedies that they made up that nobody but them knew how to make. And it's less like that now. Now, if you were selling something commercially, you would have to put the ingredients on it. And there are, very good reasons why those rules were enacted. And some of the reasons why those rules were enacted had to do with people selling remedies without saying what was in them. There were a lot of patent medicines in the first quarter of the 20th century or so, or even the generation or so before that, many of them just contained alcohol and opium. And they wouldn't necessarily say that that was what was in them. Often they would say that other things were what was in them. And because people knew alcohol and opium and were not necessarily trying to have those, but they would sometimes those would be what made the remedies work. And so people would buy them under false pretenses, thinking that it was something else, or not knowing what it was, only that it was a secret. And then, well, opiates create repeat customers, and as the pharmaceutical world is well aware. And so keeping things like that from happening is the reason why in modern times, if you're going to sell something for human consumption, you have to have an ingredients list. And for me, I think that I don't consider it obligatory to teach anyone how to make a remedy that I make, but I will tell them whatever they want to know about what's in it. I don't even try to keep the proportions or anything like that secret. I don't really believe in keeping secrets from people about what they're taking for their health. So I, generally will tell anybody whatever they want to know, answer any questions that they might have about remedies that they might be taking for themselves. And I think that that's, a fairly widely adopted piece of ethics, as in contrast to the thing I said about money, which not everybody would agree with me about. I think just about everybody feels like, you can't have secret formulas, that's not ethical, or that it's at least too open to abuse, that people need that transparency of knowing what is in the things that they're getting. And a lot of people don't care. A lot of people don't care what you're giving them. A lot of people aren't interested in what the ingredients are. But it's just like, okay, this is this crazy concoction you whipped up, I'll take it. But it's important to make that information available to them. If I make a remedy for somebody, usually I'll put the ingredients on it, and so that they know what they are. A lot of people like to go home and look them up. Sometimes they'll go home and look them up and not find anything if it's something that's not one of the more common commercially traded herbs, something like reindeer moss, for instance. There's not as much information out there about it because it's not something that's being widely used as a supplement, even though it does have a lot of history of use, and there is some information out there to be found on it. But yeah, I think that you can have your own techniques for preparing things, but you at a minimum have to tell people what is in the stuff that you're giving to them. And I believe that it's really kind of wise or beneficial to give them as much information as they're interested in about the remedies, because I think that information can be empowering, and that it can help them to feel like they are taking part in what they're doing. They're not just passively receiving some remedy from you. They're taking it as and maybe might help them to feel more involved in the process, to know what's in the remedies that they're taking. So I think, in general, keeping secrets from the people that you're treating isn't a good idea. Keeping secrets for them is a good idea, but not, that you can decide for yourself what feels good as far as the amount of information to share about the process. But if somebody wants to know about a remedy that I'm giving them, if they want to know where I got the plant material, I can tell them where it came from, where it grew. I really don't like to use herbs in my practice if I can't answer that question. Sometimes it might be something like, where did I get this star anise? And I'm like, well, I bought this from a company called Frontier, and they got it from Indonesia, and it's organically grown in Indonesia. And that's like the worst answer that I like to be able to give. I much better like to be able to give an answer that's something like, this wormwood here, this grew in my garden and I harvested it in September of last year. That's a much better answer, because I know exactly where it was, and when it was picked and everything like that. So, there are different levels of information that you yourself might have about what you're giving people, depending on how you're sourcing the things. But insofar as possible, I think it's good to share that information with the people that you're giving the remedies to. And generally speaking, I haven't had a lot of disputes arise between myself and people that I've worked with. I have been pretty fortunate about that sort of thing. But if somebody gets a hold of me and says, I don't like the way this tastes, I can't take it, or something like that, usually I'll offer to replace it for them. I don't necessarily feel that I'm obligated to do that ethically, but I do think that it's kind of maybe a wiser choice in terms of not alienating people and that sort of thing, to be able to say, well, since that didn't work out for you, let me try this other thing instead. Now, if they come to me and it's, after they've taken the thing and saying that they didn't like it, that's a different thing. But if they're, just saying that they're having trouble being able to take it because of the way it tastes or the texture of it or something like that, or, they feel like maybe it doesn't feel good in their body or something like that, it upsets their stomach, anything like that, I'm inclined to just try and keep that from becoming an issue. I think that, generally speaking, I really want to do whatever I can to take care of the people who come to me for care. And even though that's sometimes can be inconvenient, it doesn't happen that often. And so it's not like a huge imposition for me to try and make it right when something doesn't feel or taste or seem right to somebody. So that's always something that I feel, that is a good idea to do, when it comes up, which isn't that often for me. I mean, it definitely does happen sometimes, but not a lot of the time. I try to give people the easy, well-tolaerated herbs as the first line of treatment most of the time, partly for that reason, because I feel like, I could give them something more dramatic, but I also feel like that's potentially an ethics issue if I'm not giving them the best tolerated thing that is likely to work. I could, and that is a point where the medicine in my family differs from the medicine in the community that I grew up with in Eastern Kentucky, because a lot of the traditional Eastern Kentucky remedies are not the well-tolerated things. They're the ones with dramatic, strong effects that are very noticeable. And those, for whatever reason, those became the popular sorts of remedies to use. For example, if someone were nauseous, I would be inclined to give them something like ginger to try and settle their stomach. Some people might have them take some green tobacco water, which is made from unripe tobacco leaves, which will make them vomit and kind of get the nausea over with, sort of bring it to a head. And that's more like the dramatic purging style of medicine that was more popular in the community that I grew up in. And not everybody used remedies like that, but they were very familiar to people. And I consider that actually to be a less ethical way of going about it, because it has more potential to harm the person who's seeking help, even though it also, might impress them, might be like, wow, that sure took care of things quickly. But I would rather them be less impressed, but also put less at risk. And so as a result of that, I use a lot of large doses of weak herbs instead of smaller doses of super powerful, glamorous herbs. Um, and I think that that's a good approach. I think that it's an approach that honors the life and health and safety of the person coming to you to seek aid. I think it honors their trust more than it would to use, a dramatic, overpowering sort of remedy. Usually working with the body instead of trying to force the body into one direction or another. Sometimes I do use more powerful low dose things, but they're not the first thing I reach for. It's just, if the situation seems to specifically call for it, I have strong things, but most of the time I use milder, better tolerated things. All right. Any questions about any of that? All right. Moving on, one of the herbs that I want to talk about today is Vitex. Vitex agnus castus is its Latin name. It's sometimes called a chaste tree or chaste tree berries. The berries and the bark are both used medicinally. The berries are much more commonly used right now. They're usually what you would buy if you went and bought the stuff. And this has a long history of use. The name agnus castus means chaste lamb, and it's traditionally been used, so sometimes it's also called chaste tree. I usually just call it Vitex, which is its genus name. But this has traditionally been used for a variety of different endocrine system situations, different things to support the endocrine system. So in some monastic communities, the reputation of it is anyway that the bark was used to basically decrease libido, make it so that people didn't have any sex drive, make it so that celibacy was, more their natural inclination. I don't know if that's really a true story or just a reputation that it has. I haven't really seen it do that to, there are actually other herbs that I think are better for that. But if that's what you're going for, which for most people it is not, but if you were going for that, I think there are other herbs that have a stronger tendency to have that effect. But generally speaking, it's been used more in recent years for things like menopause and symptoms of menopause and sort of mood changes that are affected by hormonal cycles. So what nowadays people might call premenstrual dysphoric disorder or something like that. But that's a relatively new term, but just kind of helping people to not be as thrown off by changes in their hormonal cycles is kind of the large overview of what people, or the basic summary of what people tend to use chaste tree berries for. I have a picture of it here. I want to see if I can find and share that. Well, I don't seem to be able to find the picture of it. Um, anyway, it's a small tree. Sometimes it's more like a shrub. Usually it's like a tree a little bit smaller than an apple tree. Doesn't get real big, but um, it's very much loved by bees and other pollinators, and it has small fruits on it, berries that are the main part that's used, often as a decoction. And it just tends to, sometimes people would say balance the hormones. I don't really like that terminology because it's not exactly what's going on, but it's sort of an adaptogen that helps people to be not as thrown off by changes in their hormones, not either overly excited or overly depressed or anything as things change throughout their cycle, and also throughout aging and things like that. So it's kind of just sort of considered a tonic for the uterus and the ovaries. Um, in men, it also has some of the same types of effects. You know, like I said, people did use it for decreasing libido. Um, I think that it might also have some just sort of antidepressant and adaptogenic qualities as well. But it tends to help people feel a little more energetic and a little more of a sense of well-being. And it's generally speaking is doing that through modulating the endocrine system, through modulating the hormones in the body, and how they're received and responded to. Um, yeah, so that is it's not an herb that grows around here on its own. So, you know, it's something that if you were to you know you could grow it here. It will grow here just fine if you get the tree and plant it, but it won't. It doesn't. I haven't ever seen it growing except where it had been planted. I haven't even seen it like as an escapee from cultivation or anything like that. Um, but it's not so hard to grow or anything if somebody wanted to grow it. And if someone wanted to purchase the berries, they are commercially available. And the bark of the same tree is a little bit it has a slight laxative effect and it's kind of bitter, but it also does have um, a regulating effect on the endocrine system. So I think of it as being something that works on the liver, especially, and then the endocrine system in general, partly through the medium of the liver, which, you know, the liver produces a lot of the building blocks that the other glands then turn into various different hormones. So, you know, the function of the liver, even though we don't necessarily think of the liver as an endocrine gland, it does have endocrine functions as well as digestive functions and circulatory functions and a whole lot of other things. Um, yeah. Another plant that we have here in Kentucky that is more similar, that's more common than Vitex and similar medicinally is viburnum. Viburnum is also a bush or a small tree. There's a few different kinds that grow here, a couple that are native and some that are not native, but medicinally they're all pretty similar. Viburnum bark is the usual part that's used, but you can use the berries from it as well. The bark is mostly used for cramps, but it does, and it's sort of a warming, has a warming flavor to it, which Vitex does also. Overall, it's a little bit of a tonic for the endocrine system and reproductive system. And then the berries are also like that, but they're quite a bit milder in terms of their medicinal effects. The seeds inside the berries actually have most of the medicinal stuff that's in the berries. So if you're just eating them, you're probably not really getting that. But if you were to crush them up and make a tincture out of them or something like that, a decoction, then you would get what was in the seed as well, which is some steroidal saponins, some plant-based steroids. The fruit itself tastes kind of like cranberry when it's red. When it's not all the way ripe, it has a couple of stages of ripeness at which it can be eaten. But when it's red, it's sour like cranberry. So high bush cranberry is one of the names for it, even though it's not actually a cranberry. It's a totally different thing. But it has some stimulating effect on the kidneys because of the acids in it, similar to what cranberry has as well. So a little bit of a diuretic effect. Whereas the chase tree, the bark has a more of an effect on the liver. So they both do have like an element of purging, an element of filtration and cleansing to them. And then apart from that, the bark or the fruit of either one is going to have some modulating and tonic effects on the endocrine system. And like I said, menopausal type symptoms, things like hot flashes and night sweats can be sometimes helped with it. Mood changes that are associated with hormonal cycles are also often helped by either of them. But, I think on the whole, I would say that Vitex is a little bit more, has a little bit more of a dramatic effect as far as that goes, a little more of an immediately noticeable effect. But they both have a pretty long tradition of use, long history of use. Viburnum is not so widely used in the herb world right now. And chase tree is quite widely used, but they have similar tonifying and modulating effects for the endocrine system, and in particular for the uterus. So they're good herbs to know about in respect to all of that. Just a second. Make note of what herbs I have spoken about already, so that I don't lose track. And then another herb that I want to talk about today is bladderwrack. Bladderwrack is a type of seaweed. Rack is an old word for seaweeds, I believe, in Old English. And the bladder part of the name refers not to the human bladder, but to little balloon-like structures on the thallus of the seaweed. So seaweeds don't really have leaves and stems exactly the way that terrestrial plants do. They're not exactly plants in the strictest sense. They're kind of their own separate thing, but they have what's called a thallus, which is like the main body of the plant, sort of a combination of leaf and stem. And the thallus of bladderwrack has these little balloon-like structures on them that make it so that it floats when the water is above it. So bladderwrack can be attached to rocks, or it can be free floating in the ocean. It can break off, and the buoyancy sometimes helps it to break off and float, but it floats with the waves and it moves, so it migrates, you could say, and gets to other places that way. So bladderwrack is, if you just have it by itself, it's got similar medicinal properties to other seaweeds. It's demulcent, it's slimy. If you make a decoction of it, it makes a thick, slippery type of thing. And it is salty because it grows in the sea, but it has a similar amount of salt inside of it to what's outside of it in the seawater. So it's pretty salty, pretty high in minerals from the sea. And it's so because of that, it's mildly astringent and mildly antiseptic because of both the salt that's in it, as well as it concentrates iodine from the sea, and it contains a higher level of iodine than most other seaweeds. It's not the highest iodine of any seaweed, but it contains a very large amount of iodine as far as vegetables in general go, and even compared to a lot of other seaweeds. So it's a yellow colored seaweed. And there are multiple different species. There's spiny bladderwrack, which is got little prickly things on it. And then there's the Fucus vesiculosus is the species that is kind of like the most commonly traded species, or at least, what is on the label of most of the herbal products out there made from it. So people take bladderwrack sometimes as a thyroid support herb, and that is not wholly incorrect and not wholly right either. The thyroid does need iodine to function, so that's what's correct about it, is that you do need some iodine in your system to be able to make thyroxine and liothyronine, which are thyroid hormones. But you don't need very much of it, and your body stores iodine. So really taking bladderwrack a few times a year would probably give you as much iodine as you need. Now, it used to be the case that a lot of people had thyroid disorders as a result of not having any iodine in their diet. In certain places, like here in Kentucky, there just isn't any iodine in the soil, especially in Eastern Kentucky. There's a little bit here in Central Kentucky. In Eastern Kentucky, there's not really any iodine in the soil. If you grew all your own food there and just, everything was local, you might not get enough iodine in your diet, and you might get a goiter as a result of that. And that used to be a very common condition. Now, partly because there's iodine added to salt, but also partly because most people get their food at grocery stores and it's coming from a variety of different geological environments, and there's just not, it's a trace mineral that you only need traces of. Most people now who have thyroid problems in the 21st century is not just about being deficient in iodine. So that's something that was a very common deficiency at a certain point in time, and that affected a lot of how the culture looks at the thyroid, but now it's not as common. I read something written by one of the eclectic physicians, I can't remember which one, in the early 1900s, talking about thyroid disorders that were not a result of iodine deficiency. Basically, they described what we would nowadays call Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune condition of the thyroid. And they said, but the condition is so rare that there's no practical reason to include it here. I'm just including it for interest in his medical book that he was writing. And that the average practitioner would never see a case of it in the course of their entire career. Now it's a very common condition, and I'm not really clear as to whether that actually changed or whether he was just wrong about how common it was back then. But he did seem to be able to recognize it. He did seem to know how to recognize it and so forth. So it seems like he would have recognized it if he was seeing it. But in any case, it's a pretty common condition now. I don't know whether that's, a result of the nuclear testing in the 20th century, because nuclear fallout contains iodine, a radioactive form of iodine that can damage the thyroid. That's purely speculation on my part, but it's physiologically plausible. Or whether that's just because, like I said, they might not have recognized that it was more common than they thought it was. But at the time, it was regarded as very unusual. Now it's the usual thing when somebody has a thyroid condition. It's usually a matter of there being inflammation in their thyroid and that causing destruction of thyroid tissue over the long term. So what that often looks like is that somebody will get into a hyperthyroid state where they have too much thyroid function, and that's while it's inflamed. And then as the glandular tissue becomes converted into scar tissue through the process of that inflammation, the thyroid, the amount of thyroid hormones in their system goes down. So that's not something that iodine will really fix. Although some people do have success or appear to have success treating it with seaweed, which may be for other reasons. It may be that it's soothing or anti-inflammatory or something like that. But it doesn't seem to be very well affected or very, something where we would have a reason to expect that just supplementing with an iodine-rich seaweed would make that problem go away. So that's why I say it's partly correct and partly incorrect to think of it as something for the thyroid. It does help the thyroid, but it's not necessarily the answer to the most common thyroid issues that are out there right now. Apart from that, bladder wrack can be used topically. It can be, if it is cooked, it will basically sort of melt and turn into a gelatinous substance. Not really gelatinous, but it feels gelatinous. A jelly type substance, which can be used for burns. It's really nice for burns because the iodine that's in it makes it a little more antiseptic, and the soothing texture of it is kind of like aloe. It also helps hold moisture on the burned area, which helps it to heal up faster. So that's something that can be used similarly to aloe to make a burn gel, a topical treatment for burns. Hang on a second, I had a question here. Is it possible that simple lifestyle changes could help things like Hashimoto's? Yes, I have talked to a lot of people who had Hashimoto's who eliminated wheat from their diet and then got some relief from that condition. I hesitate to say how consistently that will happen, but it is a thing that does appear to happen sometimes. Anything that decreases inflammation is also likely to help with it because it is an autoimmune inflammatory condition. So yeah, there are definitely lifestyle changes, dietary changes, and things like that that are likely to help with it. There are also things like incrementally increasing exercise to build stamina, for instance, that could help with the symptoms of it without actually helping with it could help with the experience of the condition without helping change the underlying condition itself. So yes, so that's making a decoction of bladderwrack is a good way to make it into a gelatinous substance that can be used as a poultice or a topical application for burns and rashes and things like that. Additionally, if you take bladderwrack and you burn it to ashes, so that's kind of a dramatic thing to do, but put it in a container, set it on fire, burn it until it's not black charcoal, but white ash, light gray, whitish ash. That can be used medicinally, and that will be very rich in potassium iodide. So using a tincture made of that ash is, I actually have some here. This is what's called Lugol's solution. It is just ash. It's a solution made from the ash of seaweed, bladderwrack in this case. It doesn't necessarily have to be bladderwrack, but it is higher in the stuff than a lot of other seaweeds are. So you just kind of burn it to ash and make the tincture of the ash, or you can make a tincture of the whole herb, take the herb out and burn it to ash, then tincture the ash with the liquid that you already made. And that is a very strong topical antiseptic for wounds. It's a very good first aid thing to use. It's also something that could be used in the case of radiation emergency. If there was nuclear fallout, if people take potassium iodide that's from a good clean source, it keeps their body from absorbing the radioactive iodine that is in nuclear fallout, which causes a lot of the symptoms of radiation sickness. A lot of the time when people get a radiation, get sick from being around something like the Chernobyl meltdown, for instance, a lot of the time what's going on there is that their thyroid is taking up radioactive iodine and it's causing destruction to the thyroid. And because the body stores a certain amount of iodine and then doesn't take up anymore, using something like this, giving people a quarter of a spoonful or so of it will actually fill their iodine compartments in their body and keep them from absorbing any of the radioactive iodine. And actually, after the Chernobyl meltdown in the 80s, they did use this very substance to give people to people that were in areas where they were likely to be exposed to it as a means of preventing radiation sickness and thyroid cancer after the incident had happened. And a lot of I don't know if they still do this, but during the Cold War, a lot of maybe all health departments kept a stockpile of potassium iodide tablets on hand in case there was something like that, in case there was a nuclear emergency where people needed to take something to keep from getting sick from the fallout. So it's got that history of use, which is pretty recent history of use, pretty limited because there hasn't been a lot of situations in human history where that particular issue has come up, but it's a good thing to have. I usually keep a couple of gallons of it on hand just in case I have to give it to lots and lots of people, but I don't necessarily think anything like that will ever come to pass. But it's a great topical antiseptic, form of iodine for wounds and things like that. How often would you take a quarter spoonful? Maybe a few times a year. You wouldn't need to take it very often. Your body just can only take up so much of it. So when it was Chernobyl, they only gave it to people once. They gave everybody a single dose of it, and then said that they figured that by the time the dose wore off, that the fallout would have mostly dissipated. There wasn't really a control group where they set off another reactor and didn't do that. So I don't know. It's hard to get an accurate measurement of how effective that intervention was, since it was, not something we had seen before. Not really, not anything directly like it anyway. I do not know a good book on identifying seaweed, but there are probably field guides out there for it, just like there are for birds and things like that. I haven't really looked for one. The limited amount of time I've spent at the seaside, I've been fortunate enough to have people there who showed me what different kinds of seaweed were. So I haven't really spent that much time at the sea myself in my life, because I've never lived near it. And it's very far from my house. Most of the time I have spent at the sea has been in Ireland. So bladderwrack is called famine bolganach in Irish. I knew its Irish name before I knew its English name. As is the case with many seaweeds and some seaside plants that I'm just not familiar with because they don't grow around here. Let's see, what else did I want to say about that? Yes, it's good for wounds because it gets into them, and it kind of keeps, if you treat a wound with iodine, the iodine will stain the wound, but it will keep other things from being able to get into the wound afterwards. So if you clean the wound really thoroughly and then stain it with the iodine, it basically makes the wound a hostile or unsurvivable environment for most of the kind of bacteria that would normally grow in a wound. So it's been something that's been widely used by, especially in dirty conditions like battlefields or horse paddocks or things like that. It's a good antiseptic to use, especially after the wound has been thoroughly cleaned with soap and water or something like that. So the process I described for burning seaweed to ashes, you could do that with other seaweeds, but you'll get more of the good stuff out of bladderwrack than you would out of a lot of them. There are some other seaweeds that have higher levels of iodine, but it's a common one, and it's a widely used one in the world of herbal medicine. Would it be something useful for someone who's been exposed to red tide? I don't know if it would be or not. I would be more inclined to use things like wormwood. That's something I would often use if somebody has taken something internally that has some bacterial stuff. If they were on their skin, then maybe it would be likely to help. But if it were internal, not so much. Let's see. So yeah, bladderwrack is similar to other seaweeds in terms of what it contains. It's less demulcent than carrageen and Irish moss. It's higher in iodine than most of them, and still fairly demulcent as well. So it's a good one to know if you are going to gather seaweeds, of course, you want to kind of try and gather them in an area where there's not a lot of human population, where there's not going to be a lot of sewage going out into the ocean or anything like that. So, it's seasides areas can be polluted, so it's important to try and get it from an area that's not some remote rocky seashore. That's kind of hard to find sometimes because people tend to build along the seashore. But how long will the ash tincture last? I'm kind of inclined to say basically forever. There's not a lot that can happen to it because iodine can't ever break down into anything other than iodine, and potassium iodide isn't likely to break down into anything other than what it already is. So it's kind of like if you had salt water, it would stay salt water, no matter how long you kept it in the jar. It's sort of, it would basically keep a very long time. I don't think I've ever kept any more than 3 years or so, but I think that I would expect it to keep longer than, basically forever. I would expect it to keep long term, as long as it wasn't allowed to dry out or anything like that. All right, so any questions about chase tree or about bladder wrack? All right, let's see. For the vitex berry, have you seen it significantly increase depression in people already inclined that way? I do not think I have seen it significantly increase depression. It can be hard to tell if it might do that once in a while. I definitely haven't seen it do that consistently. If I were giving somebody that and they became more depressed, I wouldn't necessarily know to attribute it to that or not, but I don't really think that it tends to make people more depressed. Also, for Fucus and or Lugol's solution, could this help cancer patients with their radiation therapy side effects? Not necessarily, because it's really the radiation. The way that it helps with radiation is by keeping somebody from uptaking radioiodine, and radioactive iodine is used in a pretty limited setting in conventional medicine. Basically, it's used to destroy someone's thyroid in someone who has an overactive thyroid. And in that case, you wouldn't necessarily be trying to do that. You wouldn't really be, it would just make sense not to have that treatment rather than to have that treatment and then take something to cancel it out. But so yeah, not so much what I would use for that. Usually if somebody is having side effects of radiation, I had liked to use a root called tianqi, but I haven't been able to find a good source for it in a while now. American ginseng is somewhat reasonable for that, for helping people with the hair loss and the fatigue and things like that. But yeah, mostly I use other adaptogens for that type of situation. When making the ash tincture, how would you do your ratios? Yeah, I would basically do it like a dried herb tincture. I would do it the same as I would for a dried herb tincture. And sometimes I just make a dried herb tincture and then take the herbs out of it after they've tinctured, and then dry them and then burn that to ash and then add that back in. So that's my favorite way of doing it. It produces a more thick, slippery substance rather than just a perfectly liquid alcohol type one. But I basically I would just use the portion. I would base the proportion on how much of the herb there was before burning it to ash, rather than how much of the ash there was. I wouldn't, do it based on the weight of the ash. I would do it based on the weight of the herb before it was burned to ash. Okay, and I know I said this at the beginning, but I'll say it again because there are some more people here now. And also because this will be on the video and I wasn't recording at the beginning. The 22nd and 23rd, we're going to have the weekend intensive, and we will have some workshops here at the clinic and some herb walks in the surrounding area. I would love for everybody to come who can make it, and I will record the workshops for the people that can't make it. But if you are planning to be here physically, let me know so that I can prepare accordingly for how many people are physically going to be present. And I think this will be a really good learning opportunity for some techniques that some first aid type things, some various different things that would be easier to teach hands-on than over Zoom. And so, and yeah, easier to teach in a group than just me in a room by myself. So I think that that will be a really good learning experience. And I hope that everybody who wants to make it can. So that's going to be, yeah, the 22nd and 23rd of this month, just before the end of this 1-year course, which, you know, how great is it that I've had this whole year, almost a whole year now, to interact with all of you, and I'm very grateful for all of your presence. All right. Okay, well, any other questions for today? Thank you. All right, well then, I will talk to you again very soon. And thanks for coming. Thanks.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.